The Pine Creek Community Center buzzed with whispers as Karen strode in, the crowd parting like water around a stone. She noted the unusual attendance, nearly every homeowner present. Though HOA meetings typically drew only Marcus's inner circle, word had spread fast about the morning's confrontation. Marcus stood at the podium, his politician's smile faltering momentarily as he saw Karen in full uniform. Beside him sat Tyler Wyatt, the county attorney, and Bill Hollister, the commissioner, exactly as Karen had expected. "Well," Marcus recovered smoothly, "since our local sheriff has decided to grace us with her presence, perhaps we should begin with today's unfortunate incident." Karen took a seat in the front row, placing her folder on her lap. "By all means." Marcus launched into a practice narrative. Community-approved hunting program, proper permits, Karen's emotional overreaction, and inappropriate use of official authority in a personal matter. The crowd murmured sympathetically. Sheriff Winters threatened law-abiding citizens with arrest, Marcus concluded, simply for participating in a sanctioned wildlife management activity. "I move that the HOA formally censure her actions and request county oversight of the sheriff's department." Loud agreement rippled through the room. Karen noticed how many avoided her eyes, the same people whose violations she'd documented for years. She believed she was maintaining community standards. They'd seen only a busybody with a rulebook. When Marcus finally paused for breath, Karen stood. Without waiting for recognition, she walked to the center of the room. "For 3 years," she began quietly, "I've attended every HOA meeting. I've documented every violation, filed every report. Some of you call me HOA Karen because I believe rules matter." She looked around the room, meeting the gazes that would hold hers. "Today I learned that for some people, rules are just tools to get what they want." She opened her folder and extracted several documents. "This is the original survey of my property, filed with the county in 1983. And this," she held up a second document, "is the falsified survey Mr. Denton submitted 3 weeks ago, backdated to appear legitimate." Commissioner Hollister shifted uncomfortably. County Attorney Wyatt whispered urgently to Marcus. Karen continued, her voice gaining strength. "I spent the afternoon speaking with state wildlife officials about hunting permits issued for private land without owner consent. I've spoken with the county clerk about document fraud, and most interestingly, I've spoken with 7 homeowners who've had portions of their property mysteriously reassigned as community green space after crossing Mr. Denton." Muttering spread through the crowd. Karen placed a thumb drive on the podium. "This contains footage from my wildlife cameras showing Mr. Denton and his friends removing my property markers 3 weeks ago. It also shows them shooting a protected buck during closed season with improper tags." Marcus lunged for the thumb drive, but Karen was faster, sliding it into her pocket. "You self-righteous bitch," he hissed, quiet enough that only she could hear. "You think anyone here is going to side with HOA Karen over me? I built half their houses." Karen smiled thinly. "I don't need them to like me, Marcus. I just need them to see who you really are." She turned back to the crowd. "For years, I've been the rule follower everyone loves to hate, but at least I enforce the rules equally. Mr. Denton enforces them selectively, harshly for those who oppose him, conveniently overlooked for his friends." She looked directly at faces in the crowd. The Parkers, cited for their fence height, while the Johnsons' identical fence was approved. The Wilsons, fined for their garden shed while Mr. Denton's brother built an unauthorized workshop. Mrs. Abernathy, forced to remove her native plant garden while Mr. Denton's golf buddies installed artificial turf against watershed regulations. The room had gone very quiet. Karen could see recognition dawning on many faces, the pattern suddenly visible when laid bare. "I may be HOA Karen," she computed, "but I'm also Sheriff Winters. And unlike some, I don't believe anyone is above the law, not even the HOA president." As she returned to her seat, the silence broke. The meeting erupted into chaos, with homeowners shouting questions at Marcus. Karen watched impassively as his carefully constructed authority began to crumble. The confrontation was just beginning. By noon, Karen's kitchen table had disappeared under stacks of property maps, deed records, and HOA bylaws. The coffee in her mug had gone cold for the third time as she cross-referenced original survey markers against the supposed new findings. The more she dug, the more her suspicions crystallized. Marcus's survey was a complete fabrication. "Gotcha," she whispered, discovering a critical discrepancy in the filing dates. Her phone vibrated, the fourth call from the county commissioner in 2 hours. She ignored it again. The doorbell rang, and Karen glanced at the security monitor to see Ellie Ramirez, her deputy and one of the few people in town who didn't call her HOA Karen behind her back. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest," Ellie said, stepping inside. At 35, Ellie had twice the law enforcement experience, but had supported Karen's unlikely bid for sheriff. "Marcus Denton is at the station filing a harassment complaint. Says you threatened him with your service weapon." Karen snorted. "I never unholstered. Want coffee?" "What I want," Ellie said, perching on a bar stool, "is to understand why my boss is suddenly at war with the most influential man in the county." Karen laid out the property maps. "Because Marcus forged documents to steal 20 acres of my land for his hunting buddies. And they killed Goliath." Ellie's expression softened. She knew about Karen's amateur wildlife photography, about the scrapbooks filled with 4 years of Goliath's growth from gangly youngster to magnificent stag. "Karen, you can't make this personal. Marcus has the commissioner, the county attorney, and half the business owners in his pocket." "This isn't about feelings," Karen insisted, pointing to the documents. "This is fraud, and if there's one thing this town knows about me, it's that I don't let rule breakers slide." Ellie sighed. "That's why they call you HOA Karen." "I know." Karen had heard the whispers, seen the eye rolls when she documented violations. Wrong trash cans, unapproved paint colors, holiday decorations left up too long. She'd enforced the community standards no one else had the stomach to uphold. "Look," Ellie said, "you need to be strategic. Marcus is already spinning this as power-mad Karen harassing innocent hunters. He's called an emergency HOA meeting for tonight." Karen's phone buzzed again, a text from her neighbor Helen. "You oak. Denton's telling everyone you had some kind of breakdown over a deer." Before she could respond, another text arrived from an unknown number. "Better back down, Sheriff. You're outnumbered." Karen set her phone down carefully. The rules she'd lived by, had staked her reputation on enforcing, were being manipulated by Marcus and his cronies. She'd spent so long being resented for upholding standards that she'd missed how those in power bent them. "I need to make some calls," Karen said, reaching for her phone with new resolve. "What are you planning?" Ellie asked warily. "I'm going to that HOA meeting," Karen replied, scrolling through her contacts. "But first, I'm going to build a case." Within an hour, Karen had contacted the state environmental agency about illegal hunting, the county clerk about document tampering, and 3 property owners Marcus had previously bullied into silence. She'd spent years documenting every violation in Pinewood County. Now she would use those same meticulous skills to bring down the man who thought he was above the law. As dusk fell, Karen changed into her full sheriff's uniform for the first time since her swearing-in. The weight of the badge felt different tonight, less a burden and more a responsibility. "Ready?" Ellie asked when she came to drive them to the meeting. Karen patted the thick folder under her arm. They wanted HOA Karen. They're about to get. The crack of a rifle shot shattered the dawn silence, jolting Karen Winters from her morning coffee ritual. On instinct, she reached for the sheriff's badge on her kitchen counter, still strangely unfamiliar after 3 months, and moved to the window. 3 hunters in blaze orange were dragging something across her east pasture. Her heart sank when she realized what it was, the distinctive rack of Goliath, the 12-point buck she'd been photographing for 5 seasons. "Son of a bitch," Karen whispered, slamming her mug down hard enough to chip its rim. Living on the edge of Pinewood County had always come with compromises, but this crossed every line. Karen had posted her 100 acres meticulously. No hunting. Private property. Trespassers will be PROCUTE. She'd even installed wildlife cameras after joining the Pine Creek Homeowners Association 3 years ago. not that it had improved her standing in the community. Karen grabbed her jacket and service pistol, still uncomfortable with its weight on her hip. At 52, becoming the county's first female sheriff had been an act of desperation after her husband's death left her with a mountain of medical debt. The irony wasn't lost on her that the same community that had labeled her HOA Karen for reporting violations had reluctantly voted her into office when no one else would run. The hunters didn't notice her approach until she was 20 yards away, her boots crunching through the frost-covered grass. One of them was still posing for photos with Goliath's head. "This is private property," Karen called, her voice carrying across the field. "And you just shot a buck I've been monitoring for conservation purposes." The men turned, and Karen's blood froze. In the center stood Marcus Denton, president of the Pine Creek HOA and owner of the largest real estate agency in the county. His perpetual smirk widened as he recognized her. "Well, if it isn't Sheriff Karen," he drawled, emphasizing her name like it was a punchline. "We have permission to be here." "Not from me you don't," Karen said, hand resting on her holster more for comfort than threat. "And this is my land." Marcus's smirk didn't falter. "Check your property line, Sheriff. According to the new survey the HOA commissioned, this parcel falls under community green space easement." Karen felt her infamous temper rising. For 3 years, Marcus had targeted her with petty violations. Her fence was 2 inches too high, her mailbox the wrong shade of brown, her garden shed needed repainting. "The survey's wrong," she said through gritted teeth. "This land has been in my family for 40 years. Not according to the county records office." Marcus held up his phone, displaying a document Karen had never seen. "As HOA president, I authorized a small hunting party to thin the destructive deer population on community land." Karen looked down at Goliath, at the magnificent creature who'd visited her property since he was a fawn, and something inside her shifted. She'd played by the rules her whole life, had enforced them even when people called her a nitpicker and a buzzkill. But now, she realized the rules themselves might be rigged. "You have exactly 5 minutes to get off my land," she said quietly, "before I arrest all 3 of you for trespassing and poaching." Marcus laughed, but his companions shuffled nervously. "You're going to regret this, Karen." She smiled thinly. "No, Marcus, you are." The HOA meeting had dissolved into factions, with Marcus and his allies retreating to emergency damage control, while Karen found herself surrounded by homeowners sharing their own stories of selective enforcement and intimidation. Most surprising was Helen Cooper, her next-door neighbor who had once reported Karen's holiday lights for being 2 days past the removal deadline. "I always thought you were just a stickler," Helen admitted, clutching her purse nervously. "But you were right about Marcus. Last year when I opposed his golf course expansion, suddenly my property taxes were reassessed at double the value." Karen nodded, collecting testimonies and contact information. She'd spent so long being the community's villain that she'd missed the bigger abuses happening around her. Her focus on minor violations had blinded her to Marcus's systematic corruption. 3 days later, Karen sat in her office reviewing forensic accountant reports. What had begun as a property dispute had unraveled into a sprawling investigation. The falsified land surveys were just the tip of the iceberg. Marcus had been manipulating property lines, falsifying community votes, and redirecting HOA funds for years. A knock at her door revealed Ellie, accompanied by Jason Trent, editor of the Pinewood Gazette. "Sheriff," Jason said, extending his hand, "I think it's time we talked. I've received some interesting documentation about Mr. Denton's financial arrangements with county officials." Karen gestured to the chairs across from her desk. "I'm listening." "Anonymous source," Jason explained, sliding a manila envelope across to her. "Bank records showing transfers from Denton Development to offshore accounts held by Commissioner Hollister and Attorney Wyatt, immediately following certain favorable zoning decisions." Karen examined the records, her law enforcement training kicking in. "This is money laundering and bribery of public officials." "Yes," Jason agreed. "And there's more. Your wildlife cameras captured something beyond property market tampering." He pulled out a series of enhanced images showing Marcus and his hunting companions unloading what appeared to be contraband from a truck after their hunting trip. My source believes Mr. Denton has been using hunting excursions to move product. Drugs? Karen asked. Prescription opioids, Ellie confirmed. We've had a spike in overdoses this year, but could never trace the supply chain. Karen leaned back, processing the magnitude of what they'd uncovered. What had begun with the shooting of her beloved buck had exposed a criminal enterprise reaching into the highest levels of county government. Why bring this to me? She asked Jason. Your paper's been pretty critical of HOA Karen since I took office. Jason had the grace to look uncomfortable, because even when people disagreed with you, no one ever questioned your integrity. And right now, you're the only official in this county I'm certain isn't on Denton's payroll. Karen studied the evidence before her. She'd become sheriff on a fluke, running unopposed after the previous sheriff retired. The community had voted for her begrudgingly, seeing her only as the rule-obsessed woman who cited them for their unmowed lawns and non-compliant mailboxes. Now she faced a choice. Handle this by the book, which meant involving potentially compromised state agencies, or use her intimate knowledge of Pinewood County to set a trap. I need 24 hours, she decided, and I need absolute discretion from both of you. After they left, Karen drove to the county land office, where she'd once worked as a clerk before becoming sheriff. The current clerk, Maggie, had been her trainee. I need a favor, no questions asked, Karen said. Maggie hesitated only briefly before nodding. For you, Karen, yes. I need you to process these documents exactly as I prepared them, Karen explained, handing over a carefully crafted packet. And I need the system to show they were filed 3 months ago. For the first time in her life, Karen Winters was deliberately breaking the rules and finding it surprisingly liberating. That night, she sat alone at her kitchen table, staring at the framed photograph of Goliath taken last autumn, his majestic form silhouetted against the sunrise. Beside it lay her husband's pocket watch, her badge, and a handwritten letter of resignation she'd drafted but hadn't signed. I'm sorry, Robert, she whispered to her late husband's memory. I might be about to destroy everything we built here. She picked up her phone and sent a text to Marcus Denton. New evidence regarding the property line dispute. Meeting at my ranch tomorrow, 7 a.m. Come alone. By morning, her trap would be set. Whether she remained Sheriff Winters or reverted permanently to HOA Karen would depend on what happened next. Dawn painted Karen's east pasture in shades of amber and gold as she waited, leaning against her truck. She'd positioned herself carefully, within view of her concealed wildlife cameras and the 3 unmarked patrol cars from the state police hidden along her access road. Her phone buzzed with a text from Eddie, state drug enforcement in position, 4 unmarked units backing up. At precisely 7, Marcus's Range Rover appeared, dust billowing behind it. He wasn't alone. Commissioner Hollister rode shotgun, and Karen glimpsed County Attorney Wyatt in the back seat. Perfect. The whole corrupt trinity in one place. Marcus approached with his politician's smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. Karen, I appreciate you reaching out. I've brought Bill and Tyler to help resolve this amicably. Karen nodded to the east pasture. I wanted to show you something that might change your perspective on our disagreement. She led them across the frost-covered ground to where surveyor stakes marked a new boundary line. Marcus frowned, examining the markers. These aren't where he caught himself. These don't match the survey. No, Karen agreed, but they match the new documents filed with the county 3 months ago. Documents showing I sold this 20-acre parcel to the State Wildlife Conservation Department. All 3 men stared at her, confusion giving way to alarm. That's impossible, Wyatt sputtered. We checked the records last week. Did you? Karen asked mildly. Or did you just assume no one could outmaneuver you at your own game? The sale is properly recorded now, which means you 3 killed a protected buck on state conservation land, not private property or HOA common space. Marcus's face darkened. You're bluffing. You can't backdate a property sale. Interesting accusation from someone who repeatedly falsified county records, Karen replied. But I learned from watching you, Marcus. The difference is, I'm using those tactics to expose your operation, not enrich myself. Karen pulled out her phone, displaying a series of photos. Goliath wasn't just any deer. He was part of a state tracking study. The wildlife cameras that recorded you moving my property markers and killing him off-season also caught you unloading prescription drugs from your hunting coolers. Thousands of pills, transferred to vehicles registered to known distributors. Hollister took a step backward. Wyatt's hand moved toward his pocket. I wouldn't, Karen warned, revealing her service weapon under her jacket. State police are surrounding us, and this entire conversation is being recorded. Marcus lunged suddenly, grabbing for her phone. Karen sidestepped, using his momentum to throw him off balance. Her self-defense training kicked in as she pinned his arm behind his back, forcing him to his knees. Marcus Denton, she said, loud enough for the recording devices to catch. You're under arrest for drug trafficking, corruption of public officials, falsification of government records, and the illegal taking of a protected animal. As if on cue, state police vehicles converged from all directions. Officers poured out, securing Wyatt and Hollister, as Karen recited Miranda rights to a cursing Marcus. You've made a catastrophic mistake, he spat as she secured his handcuffs. I own this county. Not anymore, Karen replied, watching as officers discovered the burner phones and cash both officials had tried to discard. And for the record, I never sold my land to the state. That was a bluff to get your confession. Marcus's eyes whitened in fury as he realized he'd been outplayed by HOA Karen. 6 months later, Karen stood at her kitchen window, coffee in hand, watching a young buck tentatively approach the salt lick she placed at the edge of her property. Not Goliath, but perhaps his offspring. The newspaper on her counter bore the headline, Former HOA President's Denton receives 20 years in landmark corruption case. Her phone rang. Helen from next door. Have you decided about the nomination? Helen asked without preamble. Karen smiled. The county commissioner's special election was approaching, and a citizens' committee had unanimously nominated her to run. The same community that had once mocked her as HOA Karen now saw her methodical approach to rules and justice as exactly what they needed. I'm still thinking about it, she replied, though the signed acceptance form lay ready on her table. After saying goodbye, Karen stepped onto her porch and looked across her land, all of it still legally hers. The morning was quiet except for birdsong and distant wind chimes. Her badge caught the sunlight as she pinned it to her jacket. She was still Sheriff Winters, still the woman who believed in rules and order. But now she'd understood the difference between following rules and serving justice, and which one mattered more. As she headed to her truck for another day's work, Karen glanced back at her property. For a moment, in the golden morning light, she could almost imagine Goliath standing proud at the forest's edge, watching over his domain. Some battles were worth fighting, even when they came at a personal cost. And sometimes, Karen reflected, it took losing something precious to find your true purpose.